Hurricane season is here. Jared Smith with Charleston Weather tells me how you can prepare for the season for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Jared Smith, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Good to be back as always.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it greatly. You are the founder and CEO, obviously, of Charleston Weather. Obviously, CHS Weather on Twitter as well. And I know that you obviously forecast the weather here in Charleston daily for us. And as a matter of fact, I brought you back on today because there's two things I want to talk to you about. Obviously, the upcoming heat wave again, part 2. And then, of course, the hurricane season. Let me begin with the heat wave. What can we expect here in Charleston?
So the next few days are going to be pretty hot. But the good news is that, remember that nice, that nice weather we had this past weekend?
Yeah.
We got some of that is hanging around, which is really good news. So we are going to see those heat indexes climb again. We are going to see the air temperature 97, 98. Some places well inland could hit 100, and look, 100's hot. It doesn't matter if it's a heat index, if it's the air temperature, it's hot. But the good news is that because the dew points are going to still be running in the 60s as opposed to the 70s, like the mid 70s, we're not going to see the heat index get too far out of bounds. We could see a brief period of 105-degree heat indexes, maybe Wednesday and Thursday afternoon, probably Thursday afternoon being more likely. But overall, this is not going to be last week's heat wave. I think that's the key takeaway here. The position of the high is such that we're getting downslope flow off the mountains too, and so that's helping to, kind of mix out some of those dew points. With a little bit of drier air. So we've got a couple things working in our favor this go around. However, hot is hot. It doesn't matter if it's a heat index, the air temperature, or nasty combination of both. It's still tough on people, and so we want to make sure that everyone's getting enough water, getting plenty of breaks if they're working outside, especially in the afternoons. And don't forget the sunscreen. It's UV index. It's a UV index 10, 11 season. Can burn very quickly, so we want people to be aware of that as well.
And you talk about inland. Where exactly will those temperatures hit 100 degrees or more?
Probably closer to like I-95, and then when you get into Columbia, they hit 103 at one point last week. I think they're going to do something probably fairly similar this next go around. So, but places like Columbia, into the Central Savannah River region, and getting into Georgia and stuff. So, again, probably not so much here in the Low Country. We could see a rogue, we did see a rogue 100 last week at Somerville at the sensor there. Again, that's not necessarily the most quality controlled sensor, so we'll see, but certainly something that we'll be keeping an eye on.
Oh, yes, indeed. Absolutely. And I was just in downtown Columbia on Saturday, and it was fairly hot up there as well. But let me go to the hurricane season. I know that NOAA has already forecasted an above normal hurricane season in the Atlantic with up to 21 named storms this year. 10 storms can become hurricanes, the agency says, and 3 to 6 storms may reach a category of 3, 4, or 5. Let me ask you this. Normal implies there's an average number of hurricanes and tropical storms. If the number of these events have been obviously above normal for the past 7 straight years, wouldn't that raise the average number?
Yes and no. I mean, average is calculated by climatology. So we recently shifted to 1991 to 2020 climatology. It used to be 1981 to 2010. With the advent of the new decade, 1991 to 2020. And so, yes, the averages are being raised, but we are still outperforming those averages. I mean, remember, the only other time that we exhausted the list and then some before 2020 was 2005, when we got into the Greek alphabet that year. And then 2020, obviously, we got into the Greek alphabet so far that they had to decommission the Greek alphabet and move to a new set of names in 2021, which we were one name stormed away from getting to. So we're still, despite the fact that those averages are continuing to move, we are still outperforming those. It has been a couple of factors. It looks like a triple dip La Nina. We don't usually stay in La Nina conditions for 3 years, but that's where we are. And so that will help keep the East Pacific kind of quieter, although right now it's in a bit of a busy period because of certain oscillations and certain teleconnections global teleconnections that kind of govern tropical development. there is so East Pacific a little bit quieter, but in the Atlantic, where we still continue to have just bathwater sea surface temperatures, good ocean heat content there, lower pressures, so more rising air, more propensity for storms to get started, and then the wind shear is generally going to be lower, and that when that wind shear is lower, that allows that hurricane, those tropical cyclones to really spin up, organize, and do their thing. So that's what we're concerned about. As far as getting into later this year, we've just had two just blockbuster back-to-back seasons, 2020, 2021. We'll see what happens in 2022. There's some potential that we may be trending neutral later in the season. Let's hope that happens. I would like to see any little thing to help temper this season would be fantastic. So, but again, it's just something we got to watch.
Yeah, and the La Nina conditions, how have that greatly improved over the past couple of years? I hate to use those particular words.
Yeah, I mean, we have just continued to run cooler than normal in the East Pacific, and when you run cooler than normal in that just disturbs everything downstream. Now, El Nino, when it's warmer than normal, then the Pacific is popping off, and the wind and the downstream wind shear, the downstream effects, including higher wind shear, etc., that will tend to help suppress that activity. We just haven't seen that. That just hasn't been the thing. It's been a while. It feels like since we've had that, and so we keep getting back into this where we have a lot of convection over the Eastern Pacific that is keeping the sea surface temperature down, which is in turn influencing everything else across the Americas and into the Atlantic.
Wow. And I hate to ask this silly question, but how many consecutive years does it actually take to be considered the new normal when it comes to these numbers?
Well, scientifically speaking, again, it's a 20-year climatology, right? So 20 or 30 years. I haven't had enough coffee. Can't math right now, but 91 to 2020. So yeah, that's 30 years. Yeah. So it's a 30-year climatology, and that gets updated every 10 years. So in 2031, we will be operating off of 2000 to 2020 climatology. So again, it's kind of a moving target here. So that's just kind of where we're living right now, and so it's going to take some time for these normals to adjust. And again, we've had a few up seasons. If we have a few down seasons, then of course law of averages working out, things will kind of smooth out. But I think the point that we're getting to here is that yes, the averages are trending up. The new climatology is warmer. The new climatology is wetter in some places and much drier in others. So a lot of that, we were taking a really hard look at that last year when it was rolled out. And so again, we have, there's going to be, the trend is up. I think the trend is up both in, kind of the season to season runs, but also if you look at the averages, we're definitely, if you look at the moving average for the past, few seasons, we're definitely on a sharp uptick right now in named storms.
Wow. And the number of obviously major hurricanes over the Atlantic has risen actually by how much?
So that's what's interesting. That's the interesting part of this, is that the number necessarily hasn't really moved too much. The number of majors has not moved terribly much. We're not seeing every named storm pop off into a Cat 5. That's not happening. Two things are happening here with the number of named storms. One, yes, the conditions have been much more favorable for the development of tropical cyclones. Absolutely. But two, we're better at finding them. It used to be that there were a lot of tropical cyclones that that might have spun up for a little while and then dissipated, and we didn't have the resolution and the satellite imagery or the data to find them necessarily until after the season. Our real-time detection is getting better. We are getting better at this. We have much higher resolution geostationary satellites, radar deployments. We're able to do more low level scans now, which is helpful in many situations, but certainly here as well. And we have several polar orbiting satellites that basically they run at a much lower orbit that go around and take pictures as they kind of fly from north to south, or south to north, or whichever way they go. I mean, some of them move into in different ways. Yeah, but the point is that we just have much more data. We just, because not only are the satellites higher resolution as far as like the map resolution, like you think of resolution on your screen or on your phone or something like that, and it's like, wow, this is really sharp, this is really crisp, but it's also temporal resolution, time. We get just so many more images now, and that, I mean, we can position a sector of the satellite to update every minute.
Wow.
We can position two of those sectors in one place to get updates every 30 seconds. So that is an extraordinary advance that we've had over the last few years, and so we're finding more of these guys. The problem with the majors, though, is that we are seeing an increasing trend in these storms gathering speed, gathering strength very quickly, especially over the Gulf, where they're in rapid intensification right up to landfall. Tropical storm, and then 20 hours later, Cat 3, Cat 4, on the way to make landfall. I mean, Ida last year, Ida held its own over Louisiana as a strong hurricane for quite a while. It weakened a little bit as it got over, as more of it got over land, but it did not weaken very fast at all. And so, because it was still intensifying rapidly. And again, we have other tools that can help us see that aboard the satellites, geostationary lightning mapper, lots of little tools there that can show us the lightning content in these storms where we did not have that before. We just did not have that, because how are you going to put a bunch of ground-based lightning sensors out across the ocean? Can't do that. But with a satellite, we can see. It's a high-speed camera that lets us see the flashes, and so we can better assess whether rapid intensification is ongoing, which is good, because that's a very urgent forecast problem that we've got to get solved, because that has so many, that has just so many implications for evacuation decisions, logistics, and what have you. Because again, if you're seeing, oh, it's just a tropical storm and it's a day out, and then the thing turns into a monster, as unfortunately people in Panhandle of Florida with Michael, several times in Louisiana over the past 2 years, and they've had to contend with this. So again, it's been interesting, because we're detecting better. When they get stronger, there may not be as many strong ones, but when they get stronger, look out, because they have been much stronger.
And what are those other urgent forecast problems that need to be dealt with right now?
I mean, I would say that, tropically speaking, rapid intensification is certainly a big one. And we're starting to see some improvements in that. Last year, I won't forget this, that the Hurricane Center explicitly forecast, I want to say they explicitly forecast Ida's rapid intensification. So they were able to get out ahead of that, and it verified well. And Weather Twitter was like, wow, they've never done this before. And the Hurricane Center guys on Twitter were like, yeah, we've never done this before. and they're just, so we're already getting some of that research into operations, which is great. That's a big one. Storm surge is always an important thing that we still, need to fully understand. Especially here, I think, as we become more and more vulnerable just to tidal flooding. I mean, again, we just came out of a round of coastal flooding just from the moon, right? And in some onshore winds, as we get more and more vulnerable to that, there's still a lot to learn about storm surge and storm surge predictions. And I think the other problem is messaging those things. We have a lot of new science available to us. We're working out the ways to message those things. And so, a reasonable worst case scenario is what is messaged, but oftentimes you get a bunch of trolls coming in at you and saying, oh, it wasn't nearly this bad. I'm going to write out the next Cat 3. And it's like, okay, but the Cat 3 winds are going to be very close to the core of the storm. No two storms are alike.
Nice.
And again, it was a reasonable worst case scenario. I urge people to try gratitude in these situations because it just goes a long way, because again, we want people to be, prepared for the worst and hope for the best. And part of preparing for the worst is telling you just how bad that worst could be.
Wow, exactly right. And I'm sitting a couple blocks away from Lockwood Drive, where most of that flooding took place a couple of days ago. But this is another redundant question, I think, Jared, but surely by definition, if you have 7 years in a row of above average hurricane seasons, then does that actually become the new average?
So eventually it will, but again, that average is that 30-year climatology that I was talking about, that 1991 to 2020, and then in 10 years' time, 2000. Yes. 2001 to 2030. It's all about that. That's kind of like the standard climatology that is used in the federal government and the sciences to determine what is normal and what is not. And so those will certainly show up, but they take the large time scales to so that a couple anomalous years don't necessarily ruin the whole thing. We're taking a larger snapshot of it.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. And how far in the alphabet do you think we'll go this particular year?
I mean, when you look at the predictions, I think we're going to get pretty far. It's very possible we may exhaust the list of names again. That's is certainly within the bounds of the forecast, and we'll have to. Hopefully, we don't have to dust off the alternate list. But again, if we do, that's not out of the realm of possibility here. I will say that, one interesting thing about this season is that for the first time since 2014, we did not have a named storm in May. Now, I qualify named storm because there was an area of low pressure that was organizing very nicely on radar just before it made landfall at Pensacola. No advisories were issued on it or anything like that. And again, it was fairly weak. It wasn't, it wasn't intensifying into a hurricane, obviously, but you could see it get those tropical characteristics. And again, that goes back to that really good detection. So something tells me that we will have some sort of subtropical cyclone that will eventually be added to the records for this May. But that's probably will come after the season. So we'll see what they say. There's always a postseason analysis. We'll see if they put that one in there. But that being said, we've already burned through Alex, and so we're just so we're on the B storm now, and we'll just wait and see. It's been pretty quiet so far. Again, the East Pacific has been has been kind of the busy place for the moment. But there's certainly been signals in the modeling that, as we get later into June and into July, we could see, something spin up maybe, around the Gulf or some such. That's certainly a possibility. But again, there's a lot of fantasy land in the models too. Yeah. There's a ton of fantasy land there. So it's important to be able to distinguish between what's a true signal and what's just noise. And there's a lot of noise in the signal right now.
Wow. And typically, how many subtropical cyclones are associated with these hurricanes normally?
Yeah, so subtropical is kind of when we hear subtropical, think of it as a hybrid system. So okay, hybrid system. What the heck does that mean? So basically, it's like you have a hurricane is considered a warm core cyclone. It has no fronts. It's just a self-contained, self-sustaining warm core cyclone. It's warm at the center of it. You get all the way up, and you're in you're in the 70s in the middle of it. Whereas a cold core storm is going to be associated with cooling aloft. It's going to be associated with really incredibly steep convection and those kinds of things. So when you get a hybrid, and those cold core systems have air mass changes that come with them. They're dragging cold fronts. They have a warm front. They have, sometimes they have an occlusion where the warm and the cold air masses come together. So there's those, meteorological nuances to it. So when we talk about a subtropical system, this is a system that is starting to develop some of those characteristics of a tropical cyclone. It might have banding. It might have, it might be starting to shed its fronts. It might be, but it still could have a frontal system attached to it. It could still be, so that's when we kind of get into that kind of weird, kind of weird no man's land. But we name those. We've been naming those for the past few decades. And so that also, if you want to talk about the increase in named storms, that will also contribute to that a little bit.
Huh. Very interesting. Very interesting. And I know you talked a lot about Florida in the interview thus far. How does that loop current look right now from, say, Texas to Florida?
Slowing down. And that is going to have some interesting impacts on a lot of environmental concerns down the road. But the loop current is slowing down, and I'll tell you what, it's warm in there. It's quite warm, and there's a good plume of warm water into the Eastern Gulf in particular. So certainly something that we're going to keep an eye on to see if anything, if something organizes and goes over that, we may have to, we may be dealing with some, again, it could be a rapid intensification situation. Hope not. Kind of early in the year for that. A lot of times we need a little bit more time for everything to really get nice and warm. And June is still a kind of a weird month because sometimes you get those frontal systems in and then they stall out. And that's honestly when you get a lot of your development. A lot of your development in June is more homegrown than anything else. You have a stalled frontal boundary, then you have something spin up off that stalled frontal boundary, turns tropical, comes on shore, things like that. Usually weaker systems, they don't have a lot of time to get organized. So, but we'll watch that. Again, this is we're getting into June, July, typically quieter months. Not to say that we don't have those storms. Last year we had Elsa to deal with in mid-July, and that one being a nocturnal tornado threat. Many of you remember being very wide awake for this. Yes. So the threats come in all shapes and sizes here, and I think, Quintin, the one thing that we should be very fortunate for is that Isaias, Elsa. Last couple of years, we've been extraordinarily lucky as far as our brushes with these. Not to say they haven't been disruptive, not to say they haven't caused problems, but been pretty lucky with these so far.
Thank God and Jesus Christ in heaven for that. What will be the ocean heat content for this summer?
So again, a lot of that a lot of that's based on what kind of storms have churned over those. I expect that the ocean heat content will be continuing to increase as time goes on. Again, we have it gets complicated getting into that, but again, the sea surface temperatures are abnormally warm, and the depth of that will get the deep water there will continue to warm as well, and again, a lot of that is just when you get into OHC. That gets modulated more by the number of storms that are in an area, storms that are churning it up. You get some of that upwelling action from some of the stronger storms, and just the and honest rain cooling off the sea surface temperatures too is absolutely a thing, especially for kind of long-lived convection there. So there's a lot of variables that go into that. There's not any one uniform answer to that. It's something that we kind of assess in situ. Just as we are, as we're keeping an eye on, where development could happen, and it's just something that we're going to watch. It's just one of the many parameters that we keep an eye on throughout the season.
And speaking of rain and all this other stuff, what areas of the country and really the world are becoming resilient against these stronger, wetter, and slower moving storms?
Well, hopefully us right here in the U.S. And again, that's been, you allude to another big problem in that, we have these hurricanes that come up, they're rapidly intensifying, and then they stop moving and they sit over a place for days. Harvey is a great example of that down in Houston a few years ago in 2016. We've had, several cases of, Ida. Ida didn't necessarily stall out. It kept moving, but it dropped flooding rains all the way up into the Northeast and in New England. It flooded Pennsylvania very badly, flooded Philly very badly. It caused tornado outbreaks. It caused, all sorts of problems there. So, we have these stalling systems, right? That, the steering currents collapse over the U.S. They run into like a ridge or something like that, and then that's it. There's nothing to move them. There's no surface features to move them. There's nothing to move them. So they get sold out. So that's something that we're just kind of having to do, and I think it's early yet to see exactly how we'll respond to these kinds of threats, but know that it is something that is being acutely studied. It's one of the two big problems that we have right now with the tropics. In some places are getting too much of a good thing, and then meanwhile out west the lakes are drying up. So I mean, we're kind of in a tale of two worlds here when it comes to where the rain is being distributed and where the moisture is being distributed.
And what else are you studying when it comes to these hurricanes and other storms?
So again, I think the most interesting thing for me right now is the lightning mapper, and how does the light, and looking at the lightning content in storms to assess rapid intensification. That's one really big thing. The breakdown of steering currents as storms move out of the Gulf and into the U.S. I mean, a lot of these issues are, very, very forefront right now. And, when I'm taking a look at these things, just for my own benefit, I'm definitely looking at the hydrological side of it for sure. Also looking at tropical tornadoes. We've had a couple tornado outbreaks driven. I mean, we remember Irma.
Oh, yes.
In 2017, Irma drove a pretty decent tornado outbreak, across the area, and Elsa dropped a couple tornadoes in Charleston County overnight last year. So, again, looking at, kind of looking at those situations and, figuring out, okay, how do we get a beat up on these things? How do we, are mitigations working? Are the things that we're putting into place working? Are they, did they get overwhelmed by tropical rains? And I think the answer is maybe a good mix of both at this point.
And how should people prepare for this upcoming hurricane season?
Well, the best thing that you can do right now is to get prepared right now. Got no storms out there, no imminent threats. It's quiet. So build your kit now. One good way to do that is when you do your grocery run, and I know, and this is what's troubling too, is that I know that prices are extremely high right now, and we're dealing with gas prices that are out of this world. We're dealing with a lot of different economic stressors right now. So one of the things that you can do is as you do your grocery shopping, get a little bit at a time, because a couple things come out of that. One, you're gradually getting ready. You're getting your batteries, you're getting your water bottles, you're getting, all the things that you need in your disaster kit. Strongly recommend checking out hurricane.sc. That is it's a website from the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. That is a wonderfully complete hurricane guide for the state of South Carolina. It has everything you need as far as like disaster preparations. They have a great app. Lets you check off your disaster list, and put in emergency contacts, and even has a little like a strobe light and a whistle in it. So if you got trapped, it's a really complete. We should be very pleased with how SCEMD is getting the message out and getting the word out on these things. And if you don't follow SCEMD on social media, you are definitely missing out. They have a new meme guy, and oh boy, that's entertaining. Yeah. So look at those things, and then buy a little at a time, because when you get into a week out, and everyone is suddenly like, oh no, the storm's coming. Everyone's panicking. Everyone's not panicking, but everybody's getting stuff at the same time, and then you run into the supply chain shortages, and you run into all of those issues all over again. And so if you get a little at a time, just as you go, by the time you hit the peak of the season, you're probably in decent shape. And then another tip that's a really good idea is kind of put together like a go bag, so to speak, on if you have something like Amazon Prime. Yeah. Put together a list of supplies that you would need, in short order. Put them in a wish list or in Amazon Prime. And then if something threatens a week out or something like that, order the wish list and it'll get delivered. So those little things, especially in a world where we're still dealing with ups and downs with COVID, and I realize that is not as prevalent of an issue, perhaps, for some. For others, it still very much is a very prevalent issue. And so So the Amazon Prime Go Bag is a really good opportunity and a good option for a lot of people, but especially people who, it's so risky for them to go out into grocery stores and to go into crowded places for various immunity reasons and various health reasons.
Right.
So a lot of good ways that you can do this. And again, I know this is the last thing we want to do is be buying a bunch of stuff, and lumber is very expensive too. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Hurricane shutters increasingly a good investment. Lumber is just lumber is very expensive. It's very scarce right now. Get those hurricane shutters. You don't need to board up.
That is amazing. Good tips right there. Well, Jared Smith with Charleston Weather, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Always good to be here, and see you again real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.